everyone, Kat here. On my last video about life as a teenager at the start of the Pokémon franchise, I got a lot of requests to talk more about the trading card game. Now, even if you only have a passing familiarity with Pokémon, you're probably aware of the cards. Back in 1998, when the first set was released, there were all kinds of news stories about these things. How kids were obsessed with collecting them, how people would spend tons of money on a super rare card, or even get violent and rob people of their cards. Oh, wait, that part hasn't actually changed much. Fine, let's focus on another aspect then. Like, say, the game these things were designed to play. While I did enjoy collecting the cards as a teen, I enjoyed the game more. My local mall had a Wizards of the Coast store with weekly events, and lucky me had a shiny new driver's license, so yeah, those were my Saturdays for quite a while. What did we do there? Well, mostly played games with each other, same as Pokemon Play events today. Some people were really into trading, others less so. I was on a quest to acquire every card with Abra or Sabrina on it, so I would offer pretty good trades for those. There was actually a badge system where you got stamps and a booklet for completing certain tasks. It was the late 90s, early 2000s equivalent of TCG Online's daily quests. Tasks could be playing with certain restrictions, helping the gym leader, or doing one of these fun little Pokemon activity sheets, which was amusing because most of the attendees were teens or older. The fanficker in me liked this writing one, though. And you got real metal badges, too, which were pretty cool. When there were larger tournaments going on, this was also where we'd hear about them. But the biggest thing that kept me coming back was the chance to get creative with the cards. I love to invent new deck concepts. I had an unofficial price guide not to gauge the value of my collection, but because it had all the as-yet unreleased Japanese cards in it with the translations. Basically, the Justin Basil of its day in physical form. I would spend hours flipping through the pages and coming up with ideas. I play Pokemon TCG now, too. There's a local game shop that runs weekly sessions within 5 minutes of me, and I love it. The game has... well, it's changed a lot, and no, I don't mean that it got too complicated. Heck, some things got easier. Baby Pokemon aren't semi-immortal anymore, and confusion isn't a death sentence. Seriously, the old rules of confusion said that if you wanted to retreat, you had to discard the energy first, then flip the coin. If tails, oh well. It was way more brutal than the baby Pokemon, which I found to be a welcome addition to the game. Pokemon as a franchise back then really geared itself towards male players. So there wasn't as much marketing around Pokemon that were considered too cutesy. As a teenager who would have adored the fairy typing, if it existed then, I really loved seeing Pokemon like Cleffa break out and become these powerhouses that pretty much every deck had. I've heard some retrospectives on the game that talk about baby Pokemon like they were super annoying, but it didn't feel that way to me. They were like Boss's Orders or Iono now. Even if you didn't know much about your opponent's deck, you just kinda assumed they had Cleffa and you kept that in mind. And yeah, sometimes coin flips didn't go your way, but there's plenty of games today where coin flips can make or break the match. Overall though, the biggest change between then and now is the speed. Gameplay today is a lot faster. Pokemon hit way harder than they used to. And I think that has some pros and cons. The pros obviously being that the game is more engaging. The cons being that there's only so many cards that can move that fast. For a long time, 120 HP was the most anything could have, and dealing more than 60 damage at a time was a real rarity. Healing cards were way more common because one-hit knockouts weren't happening quite so much, and on the rare occasions they happened, you only lost one prize out of your 6. Still plenty of room to bounce back. In other words, you had more space to experiment with original decks. Now, to be clear, I'm using the term original to mean the player didn't reference a deck list of any kind. There's only so many playable combinations that in-rotation cards can make, so odds are pretty good that the crux of any new deck has been thought of before. The big difference today is players are more aware of that since, internet. Everywhere. My personal favorite original deck relied on base Alakazam, Sabrina's Golduck, and Chaos Gym, an awesome stadium that forced players to flip a coin whenever they tried to use a trainer card. If tails, their opponent got to use it. It was basically my gusting shutdown. My opponent attacks Golduck, and Golduck's attack lets me take 1 damage counter from each of my Pokemon and place it on the opponent's Pokemon. So 60 damage, Alakazam divides it neatly between all my guys, and off onto the opponent it goes. And because 70 HP was relatively bulky at the time, few things could take out Golduck in one hit. I love this deck so much. It took forever to get the lockdown into play, as our gym leader started calling it, so I lost some games purely because I couldn't get going, but when I did, it was so satisfying. It made the losses worth it. I felt clever and unique, plus I got to play with cards featuring my favorite Pokemon and my favorite trainer. I even won a local tournament with this thing. When I play today, it feels like there's a lot less room for original decks to thrive. The meta decks are well known and they're not general concepts like use Charizard. They're precise deck lists, and when you deviate from them, people are surprised. There's a quote from Karen in Pokemon Silver. Strong Pokemon, weak Pokemon. That is only the foolish perception of people. Real trainers should try to win with their favorites. And I miss the days of more people playing with their favorites. I miss those deck-building brainstorm sessions. They're not gone, but at least in my local experience, they're often discouraged, and not in an unkind or rude way. Most players who advocate for the top decks do it because they're trying to help others get better. Obviously, people want to have fun playing the game, and generally winning is more fun than not winning. We can't undo the internet's effects on the meta, and we shouldn't want to. If we have the data that says certain decks are statistically more likely to win, we can't ignore it. But maybe we can consider that there are other ways to have fun in this game besides just winning more. There's another deck I run that's completely off the wall. No resemblance to the top decks and mostly made up of cards that no one uses. I don't care what anyone says, Trubbish is adorable. One of my favorite things to do is to play someone who's never seen this deck before. You can always ask your opponent during the game to read what a card does, and I love those moments when someone reads my cards and figures out how the deck works. The game moves from one of memorization to one of analysis and guessing what I might have or where my weak point is. And it's fun at that point regardless of the outcome. Sometimes when it's obvious I can't win and the game is casual enough, I'll keep the tone light by forfeiting with Penny or Turo. I scoop up the only Pokemon I have in play into my hand, thus losing me the game since I have no Pokemon available to battle. It eases my gut reaction that losing equals I should feel bad now. Original decks are what my fondest memories of TCG back in the day boil down to. So, while it doesn't happen all the time, I still get bummed out when I hear someone advising me or others against them. Most players have at least experimented with off-list decks. If you haven't, I'd really encourage you to give it a try. Now, am I going to tell you that you are secretly a genius whose original deck will crush the meta? No. In fact, I'd say the reverse is a more likely scenario. I'd also tell you that you should play the deck anyway. But if you don't have time to make one, or it's just not your thing, we can do so much for the community by just nurturing a creative atmosphere. If someone brings a novel deck to play with, do them the courtesy of assuming they know the big decks and they brought this one because they wanted to. Newer, inexperienced players will generally ask for advice if that's what they want. Kids especially should be encouraged to play how they like, because experimenting is how they learn. Look, teacher and parent talking here, all right? If you're playing a kid and they're struggling, approach it like this. Good game. Are you looking for suggestions, or do you like your deck how it is? Saying no to adults can be hard for kids, and this puts the power to do that in their hands. Win or lose, we should all be leaving a night of Pokemon cards with fun memories. Not memories of everyone telling us our ideas weren't good enough and the meta reigns above all. Games are about enjoying yourself, so let's do more of that. Now, just to prove I'm not all talk on this point, I will be attending the TCG Regionals in Baltimore with my original deck. And guess what? If you want to spot me a coffee for the road trip, I am now allowed to accept super thanks on YouTube. Hey, it's a big channel milestone for me. Otherwise, subscribing is a huge way of showing support. Thanks so much, and my video about the Baltimore Regionals will appear here when it's ready. Until next time, happy gaming and happy training!